Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a standard, everyday Spring Boot concept and, honestly, turning it into absolute interview gold. If you've been working with Spring Boot for a bit, you already know that handling errors correctly is absolutely crucial in a real-world IT project. But, how you handle those errors? That says a lot about your experience level. So today, we're going to master global exception handling. Okay, let's dive into this, because interviewers love to test you on this exact scenario. It's incredibly common to see developers build out this fantastic REST API only for the whole shebang to completely fall apart the second a client sends a bad request or say a database lookup fails. Knowing how to gracefully catch those failures and actually communicate them properly, that's exactly what separates the novices from the pros. Just look at the difference here. On the left, we've got this messy web of traditional custom exception handling. Try, catch, throw, scattered literally everywhere. We're talking 10 lines of repetitive boilerplate code infecting every single method in every single controller class. But on the right, that is the goal. A clean 2-line controller completely devoid of those clunky try-catch blocks. This visual contrast is exactly what separates junior coders from mid to senior level engineers. Section 1, the problem, boilerplate code and bad responses. When you rely on local try-catch blocks everywhere, your codebase just becomes bloated. And honestly, errors inevitably slip through the cracks. If you've got 100 controllers, you're repeating the exact same error handling logic 100 times. And what happens when you miss one? Well, without proper handling, an unhandled error results in the dreaded 500 internal server error. This gets sent straight to your client or to Postman if you're testing your endpoints. A 500 error essentially tells the client, hey, something broke on our end, but we're definitely not going to tell you what. It is a terrible user experience. Or even worse, what if your server spits out a raw stack trace? Imagine a client reading java.lang.null pointer exception at line 42. They're going to be completely lost. A raw stack trace is totally unhelpful to a front-end application or a client consuming your API, simply because it lacks any meaningful description of what actually went wrong or, more importantly, how they can fix their request. Section 2. Enter global exception handling. To solve this massive headache, Spring Boot comes with built-in support for handling errors cleanly and globally. Instead of writing try-catch blocks everywhere, we can use a set of specific annotations to rescue us from that boilerplate code. Now, what's really interesting about this is the REST controller advice annotation. This single annotation acts like a giant global safety net for your entire project. By combining controller advice, which applies common logic across multiple controllers, with response body, it guarantees that whenever an exception is caught, the response is automatically formatted as JSON or XML rather than trying to, render some generic HTML error page. Let's walk through exactly how this builds a rock-solid error lifecycle. Step 1. Your service layer throws an exception. Maybe a user just wasn't found in the database. Step 2. Your controller doesn't have a try-catch block, so the error slips right past it. But wait, Step 3. Your REST controller advice class intercepts that error right out of the air before it can break your application or send a 500 status to the client. And finally, Step 4. It maps that error to a clean, descriptive JSON response. Section 3. Custom versus built-in exceptions. So how do we actually map specific problems to this global interceptor? How does Spring actually know what to do when a specific error happens? Well, inside your REST controller advice class, you use a method-level annotation called exception handler. This tells Spring exactly which exception class to look out for. You can configure it to listen for your own custom exceptions, like, say, an empty input exception you wrote yourself, or just default Java and Spring exceptions, like a no such element exception. Once it's intercepted, you just write a simple method that returns a response entity containing your custom message and the exact HTTP status code you want to send back. And this brilliantly illustrates the power of this approach. Look at the left side. That's what happens without our global handler. You get a confusing 500 internal server error when a database lookup comes up empty. But on the right, thanks to our exception handler, that exact same failure is magically transformed into a clear 404 not found status, along with a really actionable JSON message. No value present in DB, please change your request. The client now knows exactly what went wrong. No guessing required. Section 4. Overriding default error responses. Because, we can actually take this even further. Sometimes Spring Boot already handles certain exceptions by defaults, but the default response is just, a bit too generic.
To customize those, you simply have your REST controller advice class extend a built-in Spring class called Responsity Handler Exceptionalister. Extending this unlocks an absolute treasure trove of predefined methods that you can easily override. For instance, you could override the method handle HTTP request method not supported.
Now, why would you do that? Well, think about it. If a client accidentally sends a GET request to an endpoint that only accepts POST requests, Spring usually just defaults to sending a blank 405 method not allowed error. Boring, right? But by overriding that method, you can return a highly descriptive JSON body. Something like, please change your HTTP method type. It makes your API infinitely more user-friendly.
Section 5. The interview answer. Global versus local.
So the crucial point is, knowing how to implement this is great, for sure, but knowing when to implement it, that is the actual interview answer. You really need to understand the architectural trade-offs here. Global handling using REST controller advice is your go-to for common exceptions, things like bad inputs or database connection drops that behave the exact same way across your entire application. It drastically reduces boilerplate code. However, you should absolutely still use local try-catch blocks if you have a scenario where two different controllers need to handle the exact same exception in completely different ways. Knowing when not to use a global handler is what proves true senior-level decision-making.
So, I'm going to leave you with this question to think about. Look at your current Spring Boot project. If you implemented a global interceptor architecture right now, how much repetitive boilerplate try-catch code could you delete today? I highly encourage you to open your IDE and try refactoring just one single controller using REST controller advice and exception handler. I promise you'll be amazed at how clean your code becomes. Anyway, thanks for joining me for this explainer, and happy coding.